And for more on the situation around Syria, let's talk to Alistair Crook, former EU Middle East mediator and director of the Conflicts Forum in Beirut. Thank you for joining us on RT today. We are just hearing over the past 1.5 minutes that the Arab League has just now decided to extend its observer mission in Syria. It's where the opposition has been stepping up calls for foreign intervention, saying the violence continues unabated. Just how critical do you think the situation is at present?
Well, I think this decision is very important, in fact, because I think it reflects to an extent a growing isolation of Qatar, which has been the presidency of the Arab League and which has been arguing quite strongly for Syria to be taken to the UN Security Council. But it's increasingly isolated, I believe, in the Arab League. People are skeptical about the value of doing this. And this decision to extend it has quite strategic import because effectively by March the presidency of the Arab League passes to Iraq, and Iraq has a very different view of what's happening in Syria to that of the Gulf Cooperation Council. So it's a very important element that this will continue, and it seems therefore that it's quite unlikely, given the timing, that they will go to the UN Security Council as a few of the opposition. By no means all the opposition. Many of the internal opposition are absolutely against any referral to UN Security Council or external involvement in Syria.
When you talk about certain elements of the opposition approaching the UN for help with this ongoing crisis, you mentioned moments ago that of the further isolation of President Assad. Just who are the groups that are isolating the president? Is it the opposition, the protesters, or is it perhaps the regional powers, the Western powers? Is it perhaps global media networks? Who's to blame for all of this?
No, well, in fact, what I was saying was that it's actually Qatar that is being increasingly, the state of Qatar, that is being increasingly isolated within the Arab League. And I think that President Assad is not being isolated as the West had expected and thought would happen. And the Arab League is divided. I think Syria and Qatar, Saudi Arabia and Qatar are increasingly at odds. And I think what we saw with President Assad's speech in a Damascus square, to which tens of thousands came, shows that he has popular support. And that's reflected in polls too. A recent YouGov poll showed a majority of Syrians supporting President Assad. So I don't think he's particularly isolated. But what we see in terms of the Syrian National Council, the exile opposition group, which is really only an umbrella of very diverse groups itself, is in favor of external intervention, but then it was set up for that very purpose by the French and by external bodies. But most of the internal parties, the coordination committees, the internal political groups, are absolutely after what they've seen in Libya, what they saw in Iraq. They have no desire to see external intervention and Syria carried perhaps into sectarian war. So there's a big divide. The opposition is very divided, and it's really only a minority who really believe in external intervention, and of course they're being pushed along and financed from outside.
Well, it's interesting how you say that it's a minority that looks forward to or hopes, that is, for external intervention. It's also, as you mentioned, about comparisons being made between what happened with Libya and Iraq. But the opposition groups are insisting that Assad must go. But do you see a way out of the current crisis without him actually being forced out? Because as you mentioned moments ago, we saw him addressing supporters in the main capital square the other day. It looked like tens of thousands were out there to support him.
But I repeat that I think that you find that the opposition is deeply divided. The Syrian National Council, which was set up to sort of model the Libyan Benghazi Transitional Council, does not reflect opinion inside Syria, and it's very clear. And by that I mean opposition opinion inside Syria, most of whom are not anxious to see Assad go, even though they are very much in favor of reforms and demanding reforms that take place. They fear that external intervention, certainly anything on the Libyan model, would be a disaster internally and would carry the state towards either sectarian or civil war. So within Syria itself, as opposed to the exile groups that are outside it, there's a very strong support both for settling Syrians' problems internally through negotiation and not through external intervention.
Alistair Crook, the director of the Conflicts Forum in Beirut and former EU Middle East mediator, thank you for coming on RT today.
Thank you very much.